My chosen documentary was The Most Dangerous Man in America, Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers. I would like to start off by giving you some background information about the Pentagon Papers. The Pentagon Papers was a 7,000-page report done by the U.S. military, and it was a history of the U.S.'s military interactions in Vietnam over 4 presidencies. This report revealed lies that were told to the American people by the media and the presidency. Daniel Ellsberg worked for the Pentagon during the time of the Pentagon Papers study. Ellsberg initially started questioning the things that the American public were told during the Tonkin Gulf attack. The Pentagon received reports about how American ships were under attack by Vietnam forces. However, reports came later that made them think there was no attack to begin with. Regardless, Johnson ordered a response attack to be made based off of these questionable reports. Johnson twisted the facts of the Tonkin Gulf attack so that Congress would give him the authority to launch the attack. I thought this was pretty interesting because I never knew that the Tonkin Gulf attack was a questionable event. I always thought it was a real thing, and I was always taught that it was a real thing in my history classes. But this could just be one of the other lies that we are told as the Americans. The Americans believed the story that Johnson told them about the Tonkin Gulf attack. Why else wouldn't they? They had no other reason to disbelieve him. Johnson also told the Americans that he was not preparing for a wider war, but to Ellsberg and everyone else working at the Pentagon, it was obvious that a wider war was being prepared for. While Ellsberg was working for the Rand Corporation, a military offshoot in Santa Monica, California, he was given orders to gather atrocities performed by the Viet Cong in order to launch a bombing campaign against North Vietnam. Ellsberg was picked for this job because he was a brilliant military thinker, and he had spent time as a Marine. While he was looking for reports, he got a report that 2 American officers were captured and killed by Viet Cong forces. They were captured and dragged by chains. This was the only incident that Ellsberg found, and this was possibly the only incident in the war up to this point. I thought this was interesting because we in school always learn how brutal the Viet Cong forces were towards the American soldiers. But this is possibly just another lie that we are taught because they never received any reports of things happening up to this point. McNamara took this fact to the press in order to sway the people to expand the war. At this point, Ellsberg was a believer in the U.S. mission in Vietnam. He even spent time there to learn what was truly going on. While there, he learned of another lie that the people were being told. He had picked a night patrol to go see the front lines. However, he was later told that there was no night patrol because the Viet Cong ruled the night. This was another lie that he was told, and that the American people were being told about the success of the Americans in keeping the Viet Cong under control. Going to Vietnam did not strengthen Ellsberg's belief in the war, but it actually served to diminish it. Ellsberg said that he felt like he was the redcoats while in Vietnam. Ellsberg also began to realize at this point that the Viet Cong couldn't be beat, regardless of what was being told to the American people. He said as soon as the American forces left, the Viet Cong would be right there again to go back to what they used to be. While Ellsberg was flying back from Vietnam, McNamara was on the plane with him to receive his notes that he took while there. McNamara asked him what he actually thought of the war, and Ellsberg told him that they couldn't win. McNamara agreed with him, but then later told the press that the situation in Vietnam exceeded his expectations. He lied to the people in order to get their opinions, and McNamara did this because Johnson needed support for the war. It was at this time that McNamara ordered a study to be done about the history of the U.S. military involvement in Vietnam. This was the Pentagon Papers, as I said earlier. Ellsberg came to the realization at this point that if he kept these lies quiet for much longer, he was indirectly helping the killing of American soldiers. After Johnson dropped out of this upcoming election, Nixon won because he had led the people to believe that he wanted to end the war, but this was not the case. He instead wanted to escalate the fighting. After Nixon was elected, and Ellsberg read the earliest sections of the study, he realized that 4 presidents had been lying about the successes of the war in Vietnam. Ellsberg knew that he had to stop this from happening again with Nixon. Ellsberg attended a peace conference about peaceful protesting, and while there he met a man who was going to jail for draft resistance. Ellsberg realized that this man truly felt what he believed because he was going to jail for it, and he knew that once he was ready to go to jail for something was when he was finally going to believe. And this was when he decided to release the Pentagon Papers. Ellsberg first took his copied study of the Pentagon Papers to Congress members who were outspoken against the war because he felt that that was his best chance of getting support. The president at Rand at this time felt that this was an acceptable action because Congress was in charge of the war and they should know what was happening and why this study was done. But yet none of the Congress members would do anything with it. Because none of the Congress members would do anything, Ellsberg took the study to the New York Times and they agreed to publish a story about it. Before they could publish the story, however, they had to decide whether or not that this would affect national security and whether the public's right to know or not overruled this national security problem. They didn't think it did, and they published the story. Shortly after, the Attorney General found out about it, and he tried to stop them. And he said if they didn't stop publishing it, the appropriate actions would be taken. However, the Supreme Court said that the government couldn't keep this quiet, and they cited the First Amendment right of the freedom of the press. This was a very important case in the civil liberties because the people had a right to know. This case, New York Times versus the United States, was a case in the 28-case salute, and it helped protect the First Amendment right of freedom of press, and it gave the people a public right to know. The New York Times and the Washington Post, because of this decision, continued to publish the Pentagon Papers along with other newspapers across the country. Something interesting that I learned from this movie was that the Pentagon Papers indirectly led to the Watergate scandal with Nixon. Nixon started his plumbing unit because of Daniel Ellsberg. Nixon didn't want any more insubordination within his administration, so he started the plumbing units in order to stop this. Nixon felt that he needed to weed out anyone else like this from his administration. If Daniel Ellsberg had not published the Pentagon Papers, the plumbing unit may not have been started, and Watergate may never have happened. Ellsberg was never convicted of the charges made against him by the administration, and the courts dismissed his case. Shortly after the courts dismissed Ellsberg's case, Congress voted to cut off funding for the war. This movie clearly showed a bias towards dissupport of the war. No one was interviewed who felt that Ellsberg's actions were wrong, and clearly the director felt that Ellsberg's actions were the right thing to do. I think it would have been interesting to hear from someone who strongly supported the war and who thought that America was doing the right thing. And it would have been interesting to hear from someone as well who disagreed with Ellsberg's actions. One very important thing that I got from this is that we absolutely cannot believe everything we hear from the government and the media. We need to look at everything and research before we develop an opinion. And we need to be able to discern between the truth and the lies because of the lies that were being told to the Americans during the Vietnam War. We never know what's actually true, and we need to be able to figure out what's true. And we need to, when we find out that we are lying, we can't just take it lying down, as Ellsberg said the American people did. One weakness of the film was that it jumped around a lot in Ellsberg's life. It would switch from something about his wife and family, and then suddenly it was in Vietnam and we were watching the bombs being dropped on the Viet Cong. It made it harder to follow the message that they were trying to portray in this movie. I would have liked if they gave his entire backstory before and then did everything about the Pentagon Papers. It would have made things easier to follow, even if it wasn't chronologically accurate. I would definitely recommend this film to anyone looking to learn about the Pentagon Papers. It summarized what specifically happened, and it actually talked to Ellsberg, which I thought was interesting. I got his story, not something with political slant or bias that could be found online or in a book about what he did. I got his real opinion without someone's personal slant and what he actually felt. Not only that, but it gave a lot of good facts about the Pentagon Papers. The Most Dangerous Man in America, Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers, was an extremely interesting movie and a good way to learn about the Pentagon Papers.